So in this story that we just heard in our gospel lesson, we find the disciples in a bit of trouble. First, they face this terrible storm, and it's rocking their boat, and waves are crashing into them. And to make matters worse, this is probably what their ship looked like. If we can go to the next slide, this is an early Galilean first century fishing boat. So I don't know about you, but it's pretty hard to imagine 13 people in this boat caught in the middle of a storm. Then there's this response from Jesus that kind of seems to make matters a little bit worse. It sounds like a reprimand or maybe even harsh. Sometimes it's worded in other translations as, "Oh, you of little faith," or even worse in a paraphrase, "You bunch of cowards." It's kind of like Jesus is saying, calm down. Now, there's a meme that says, never in the history of calm down has anyone actually calmed down by saying, calm down. A friend of mine had shared this and tagged her husband. That's how I saw it. And I'm sure that nobody here can relate to that. But I wonder if maybe there's something else that's going on in this story. And maybe there's something else Jesus is teaching, and perhaps that something can inform us and inspire us as we celebrate the queer community on this Pride Sunday. Will you pray with me? Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So in many conservative traditions, including my own background, scriptures like these are often used, or maybe we should say misused, to chide people for not having enough faith. For those of us who are in the larger umbrella of the queer community, this is an all too familiar message that we receive, that somehow our identity, whether it's our gender or sexuality, stems from or maybe continues from a lack of faith or belief in God. In the work I do with spiritual deconstruction and reconstruction, I ask people, maybe there's a way we could reframe scriptures like these or beliefs so that we can hold on to the importance without further harm to ourselves or to others. So on this day, when we especially recognize our open and affirming stance as a church, which by the way, happened in the 1990s, which is awesome, I invite us to practice some perspective taking and see how we might understand this narrative differently. So in 2011, I was working and living in Cleveland, Tennessee, and there was a day, April the 27th, where it was storming pretty bad, and I felt a shift and a prompting that I needed to go check outside right now. So I looked, and the sky had turned to a dark hue of green, and this hailstorm erupted that was clunky and uneven. There were large pieces and small, and the wind started picking up. I took cover in this hallway right outside of my kitchen just as the tornado hit. It was one of many in the super outbreak of 2011. So I want to tell you, I have a lot of empathy for the disciples in this story. So being in a storm and screaming out for Jesus, I relate pretty hard. So my first understanding of this story was pretty blaming of the disciples. But now that I'm in my 40s and experienced in many storms, I just think how incredibly human of them. I recognize, if anything, they must have had some sort of faith in Jesus. Otherwise, why would they have woke him up? So what might have Jesus meant in this response? Have you still no faith? In other versions of this story, such as Matthew, Jesus says, "Where is your faith?" Or maybe more accurately, where is your faith? For many people, our understanding of faith is equated with belief in God. Even when I asked AI to tell me what faith is, that's part of what I got as a response. We may say that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, to quote Hebrews. Or we may have been taught that our faith has to be constant and unwavering, or big and bold to be real. But it's never ceased to amaze me that Jesus spoke of mustard seed-sized faith being strong enough to move a mountain. In the language which Jesus spoke, which is Aramaic, the word for faith is hymenute. Neil Douglas Klotz's work reveals this word for faith can be translated as one's confidence, firmness, integrity of being in sacred unity, connected to the sacred life force. There's an element of rootedness, as well as a notion that this remains in spite of the circumstances around us. Why are you afraid? Where is your confidence, firmness, integrity of being in sacred unity, and your connection to the sacred life force? It almost appears that Jesus could be teaching something here for the disciples to awaken to. It causes me to wonder, what if this same Jesus who taught mustard seed-sized faith could move mountains, this same Jesus who told these same friends that they would go on to do amazing things, what if he was saying that they could have quieted the storm? This kind of reminder feels like a loving companion saying, why are you afraid? I've got you, and you've got this. In our current time, we face a constellation of storms so great, the term polycrisis has entered our vernacular. The storm is raging. I don't know about you, but it often feels like we are in that boat, swamped with the waves of the endless news cycle, constant outrage, and artificial intimacy on social media. All part of what social researcher and author Brené Brown recently called living beyond human scale. For those of us in the LGBTQ+ community, the crashing waves of Christian nationalism, false information against our trans and non-binary siblings, and proposed laws aimed at everything from bathrooms to medical care and our rights as families all threaten our safety and well-being. It honestly wouldn't surprise me if some prayers now sound like the cry of the disciples. Do you not care we are perishing? When I was in graduate school, I had the opportunity to attend a spiritual retreat. At the time, I was only out to a few trusted people, and I was terrified as I was beginning to live into my full, authentic self. A dear friend of mine led several sessions, including one where we were given a lump of clay and told to reflect and form it into something we felt represented that moment for us. This was just a few hours after we had contemplated on Psalm 23. This was a journal entry that I wrote a few days later. Surely goodness and mercy. I realized that the word surely doesn't sit right with me. It doesn't feel true. Surely? My cup feels empty. The pastures are barren, and the waters are turbulent. I don't like the looks of the paths. I don't think I trust you, God. Not right now. I took the clay in my hands and walked to where I could look over the water. Surely. I repeated the word in quiet whispers, which echoed in my soul and seemed to bound across the cold and still water, only to return in the noise of the falls, powered by a recent rain. Shivering, I went inside, and the clay became warmer in my hands and began to take form. After much kneading, digging, smoothing, I held a small clay boat with 2 seats inside. I looked at it. I still don't trust the waters. I have no oars or life preserver. The waters are rough and I can't swim. I'm alone and I'm afraid. Surely goodness and mercy? Surely? Last night, I was asked to review the day and ask God to show me where she was and where I had missed God's presence. Just as the time was about to end, a gentle prompting told me, surely God is in the boat. We are meeting this moment together, this time of storms and crisis, and surely God is with us. Sometimes we see God's presence in the turning of the tides and the victories for equality. And when we do, as Mr. Rogers taught so many of us, and we look for the helpers and we see them. The storms of this time are looming and frightening. And the smaller storms rage with intensity in our conversations with one another, often becoming dehumanizing, especially online. We can try to retreat and shelter from these storms, or we can speak the words, "Peace, be still," as we advocate for one another as an act of doing justice and loving kindness. Peace activist and teacher Thich Nhat Hanh's work on nonviolence suggests the most powerful way to bring about change is to be a calming presence and diffuse rather than feed more anger and rage and fear. The act of listening, though difficult, can bring about a change of heart. We desperately need more people, especially our allies and advocates, to have these kinds of peaceful conversations and help us change the hearts and minds of those who would stand against us. Is this not quieting a storm? We have the power to show up in legislative sessions and community meetings, in boardrooms and kitchen tables, and say, "Peace, be still," to the violent storms of misinformation, oppressive laws, and harmful policies. We have the power if we have faith, that connection to sacred unity. To be a calming presence, Thich Nhat Hanh teaches we must first calm ourselves. As a young monk facing violence and conflicts and war, he learned that calming himself proved to be life-saving, as he was then able to calm other people, including his enemies. Quieting the storm within can be as simple and as difficult as breathing. Breath and spirit are deeply connected in the languages of Hebrew and Aramaic and in many traditions through time. Breath, our connection to life force. The practice of breath prayers, or praying the in and out breath with words and phrases, offers us a way to center ourselves and quiet our own inner storms of anger and fear. So we might pray, "God of love and mercy, let peace begin with me." Or we may pray, "Source of love, please help us." The other way we can calm storms within is to do that for each other. When the storms rage against our community, we need to look to each other, and we need our allies to look to us. And while quieting the storms around us, speak peace to our hearts. Much like the poem "Blessing in the Storm" by Jan Richardson, where she says, "But I will wade into these waters with you. We'll stand with you in this storm. We'll say peace to you." The latest research on health, longevity, and stress shows that stress is contagious. I hate to be the bearer of bad news there. But also, is love, hope, resilience, and peace. And connection is the biggest predictor of how well and how long we live. For those of us in the LGBTQ+ community, many of us have lost meaningful relationships. The price for being our authentic selves and choosing love and life over shrinking ourselves, or worse. Surely, when our allies advocate for us and love us fully, it speaks peace, be still, to our shame and our sadness, as well as our fear for our safety. Will you wade into these troubled waters? Will you stand with us? Will you quiet the storm? To my LGBTQ plus siblings, peace. May the storms inside you be still. So all of us, where is our faith? Where is our rootedness and confidence and sacred unity? Where is our connection to spirit? Where do we find it? Where is my faith? To be honest, it's been hard. Many of you know my story of surviving spiritual abuse and the ways that I've journeyed through the storms of having a fundamentalist background and the hardships that we faced as a lesbian couple and as a two-mom family in the South. I've been afraid lately. And as I was writing this sermon, I thought of a Christian music artist who some of you may know, Ray Boltz. It must have been his own experience as a gay man that inspired the song, The Anchor Holds, especially the lines that it's in the storms of life where God most proves their love to us. My faith is encouraged by this church. Many in this community speak peace, be still, to my inner storms without even saying the words. The way our whole family has been embraced and celebrated, the way many of you show up and advocate. And though the storms of Christian nationalism and hatred against our queer community rage, I am buoyed by connection with other people, with nature, and with experiencing God in the thin, quiet places. And I remember my connection to sacred unity when we sing together. At another turbulent time in history, we had lost great visionaries in the assassinations of MLK and Bobby Kennedy. An unjust war was raging, and the country was deeply divided. A young guy named Paul sat in his apartment. He listened to a gospel record over and over, and he found himself stuck on just this one scattered line in a song. He sat down and worked with it, and before he knew it, it worked its way into an entire song. That song would be the biggest hit Simon and Garfunkel would have. The song Bridge Over Troubled Waters has been covered by all kinds of people, from Aretha Franklin to Willie Nelson, and now we're going to have a Pilgrim version to add to the list. So as we sing in our own beloved community, let us renew our faith, remembering that surely God is with us in the boat as we say, peace, be still, to the storms both outside and within. Amen.